So my first speaker, or our first speaker, is my colleague at Think City, Dietrich, who leads our resilience team. And so you can imagine she's been really busy over these past few weeks. So her 25-year career in health promotion and global health has spanned education, policy, practice, and research, from her German roots to the USA, Hong Kong, Australia, and now Malaysia. As regional director of health promotion, she led programs in chronic disease prevention, healthy aging, reducing health inequities, and community resilience to climate change. In her role as research fellow with United Nations University, the International Institute for Global Health, she coordinated discussions across sectors on reimagining healthy, just, and sustainable cities in the lead up to the UN Habitat's Conference on Housing and Sustainable Urban Development. Currently, Ms. Dietrich is a senior program manager for resilience with Think City here in Malaysia, applying a health lens to urban rejuvenation with a specific focus on vulnerable communities, climate, and health to improve livability in Malaysian cities through research, advocacy, and place-based interventions. Her presentation today looks at the innovation and community response to the pandemic and what we might learn to mobilize communities for climate change action.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Duncan. And it's a privilege to be here with you today. Oops. Some of the text is missing off my slides, but let's go on. What coronavirus and the climate change have a lot in common, and both of them are threats to human life. When we look at climate change, it not just threatens human life, but it threatens the survival of the planet, while coronavirus threatens human life. When we look at it today, when we look at the media, it feels at this moment more like this, that climate change is the little brother to the big COVID-19. I wanted to present to you a concept called planetary health, and the Lancet Commission on Planetary Health was launched in 2015. Planetary health refers to the health of human civilization and the state of the natural system on which it depends. And what we learn from that is around that interdependence that we want to look at. So since Industrial Revolution, really, human population is healthier than ever before. Our life expectancy has increased, poverty has reduced, and child mortality has decreased. But this has come at the expense of the health of the planet, with the increasing acidification of the oceans, the depletion of the ozone layer, and the loss of biodiversity, and many more. And that brings me to Steve Boyden's biosensitivity triangle. What we see, this sort of, to me, illustrates this interdependence very well. And that is when we start on the left, human activities, what we do influence the health of people. So, for example, through urbanization, our lifestyle, our food changes, and it has an impact of health. Reverse, also, depending how healthy we are, depends on what type of activities we can do. Human activities, like the industrialization that we've come through, that we've had, the globalization, the population increases, all of those have an impact of the health of the planet. And then there is the relationship that leads to a direct relationship between the health of the planet and the health of people. And we can see that through slower processes like the urban heat island effect, but also natural disasters like floods and so on. We've seen air pollution and the emergence and re-emergence of vector-borne diseases or waterborne diseases. So the interdependence between health, human activities, and the health of the planet. So when we compare this, we see that on the right-hand side, during the last 5 months, and I'm counting here from November, which is when the first case of coronavirus appeared, to now, at 135 deaths. In fact, today it is over 100. For climate change, there sort of estimates that already we are seeing around 250,000 deaths a year due to climate change. And this was an estimate made by Sir Andy Haynes, who used to be the director of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And he predicted that by 2050, this figure more than doubles. So you might think, okay, pandemic is, by the end of this year, we'll have more than 255,000 deaths. And that may very well be. But the difference is that with climate change, we see these figures every year, and they're increasing every single year. Now let's look at the effect that the pandemic has had on nature. And in fact, it's not so much the pandemic, but the pandemic response. The response in that a lot of the production, the factories have shut down, people are staying home, so there's a lot less traffic around. So and with that, the social isolation. You will have seen in the media pictures like this is from Venice, the clearer water and the dolphins coming back. In fact, this morning there was a picture from Adelaide in Australia with a kangaroo hopping down the main street, and cleaner air. Here in Malaysia, Think City has undertaken a study to look at the changes in nitrogen dioxide levels. And again, we can see a dramatic reduction here on the right-hand side, where the red area is now much, much smaller. Or yesterday on the news was about the land surface temperature in downtown KL, on average around 10 degrees lower than at the same time last year. However, in the neighborhoods where the people are now spending times, it has not been a reduction, because there we see the increase in air conditioners running during the day. So this is not just in Malaysia, we see this in Korea. And what impressed me a lot was the following picture, that the Himalayas were seen from India for the first time in 30 years. But the effect has also been on our wildlife. So the wildlife trade probably has come to a halt with all the other stops and movements, but hopefully in the longer term we will see a change in attitude towards lifestyle trade, the consumption of wildlife. But also, one of the reasons we see pandemics, maybe this one, not this and other ones, are also caused that we come in contact with viruses that we haven't in the past. And one of the reasons, maybe not for this one, but for others, is that through our expansion, through our population and cities expanding into natural habitats, we are encroaching into these natural habitats, getting exposed to viruses that we haven't been before. Now, in this picture, I'd like to make 2 points. One is these effects that we have seen, unfortunately, are temporary and will not make an impact on climate change in the longer term. We can see already in China, as production is ramping up, and so is air pollution. But it shows us, what really encourages me is, it shows us what is possible in even a very short time. And it shows us people that, like the picture of the Himalayas, that people might have been wondering, what is life, how would life be different with less air pollution or less water pollution? So now we actually can see what it would look like, and it may be a motivator for people to take action once this is possible. But the other one is that often there has been sort of a lag and less of commitment to make large funding available. But we can see here in terms of the pandemic, if there is an urgency and a need perceived by the decision makers, we can see pledges of 5 trillion, 12 billion, 2 trillion as listed on the left-hand side there. But let's not forget those unintended positive consequences that we have seen. For all of those, there are also the negative ones, which is the huge amount of waste created through the masks and other disposables as part of the pandemic. And as our food supply chain is breaking down, we also see a lot of food waste. This cartoon says on the right-hand side, wow, I should have thought of this sooner. So what is it that climate change can actually learn from the community mobilization that we are seeing during the pandemic? And there are a number of steps that are identified, and over the next few slides, I will explain a little bit further. So, facts create less response than fear. People respond more to immediate threats rather than long-term ones. Quick rewards and social norm and peer pressure. So we're very social animals. We copy what other people are doing, and we need to see identifiable victims. So let's look at this. So 10 years ago, if you see under the above Bill Gates' photo, it says since 2010. So for 10 years, we have known that something like COVID-19 will happen. Not much different for climate change. 10 years ago, the number of increasing death has been highlighted. And in fact, for climate change, the first major reports started as long as 50 years ago. But this has not translated into major transformative action. Humans prefer to tackle things that are proximate and urgent. Now, when this bear appears in front of you, you will take action right now. If you only know that there are bears in the area, you may be less careful or take less preventative action. Social norms and peer pressure. So what we've learned in the last few weeks are the hygiene actions we have to take to minimize the transmission of COVID-19. So peer pressure helps in more people adopting hygiene behavior. So if we walk down a street, and even with our 1.5 meter distance that we are keeping, and someone was coughing next to us, not holding their elbow over their mouth, they would get quite some stares from us. So how can we learn from this in making climate action more observable so that we can compare ourselves with others? And there have been studies where, for example, in a housing block, people's energy expenditure was publicized by unit. And so there was a lot more pressure, like if my neighbor can manage with this amount of energy, so can I. And so we need to build and explore further how we can strengthen this aspect. Let me talk to you a little bit about social networks. So in 2007, there was an article in the New England Journal of Medicine by Christakis and Fowler. And this made quite an impact in the area of health promotion, because what they discovered, looking at 32 years worth of data, is that the spread of obesity in social networks happened more amongst friends than family. So our social networks, our friends and colleagues make a lot more difference to our lives than family. And when I look at events like Earth Day, it seems that a lot of climate action climate action happens among the converted. So how can we extend our social network and mobilize the ones that are not currently part of it and convince them to take action? It is also much more powerful, this is in terms of communication, to have identifiable victims. In COVID-19, we have seen so many photos or videos of emergency departments, of aisles lined with people that have passed away. So they're the exemplars. In climate change, for many, many years, the media used images like melting icebergs or polar bears, starving polar bears. More recently, this is from a year ago, The Guardian said, we are rethinking the image we use for our climate journalism. So again, finding the identifiable victim, the people that are suffering from the bushfires, the drought, and many other natural disasters. What encourages me is to see how quickly people can change behavior. So it is, if we need to, and if that is recognized and supported by government recommendations, it is amazing what can be achieved in such a short time. So and this is what the coronavirus response has really shown us. When I look at what Think City does itself, what we are doing within Think City is the projects are a couple of projects that I'm involved in are around building social resilience through networks. And that is to empower the vulnerable communities to respond to a variety of challenges. Our vulnerable communities, no matter whether it's the pandemic or climate change, are the ones that are suffering the most and they may have been vulnerable generally, but this makes them even more vulnerable. So one project which is not focused on climate change is trying to build social cohesion and a sense of community in low-cost housing estates and public housing estates in Malaysia. So the idea here is that through a mobile app, initially we can link food aid to urban poor. But the second step is to develop a social credit system, a way of connecting neighbors to each other. Because even though people are living very densely in high-rise buildings, there is often quite limited social connection. But we also know that as our networks densify, our resilience increases. So by finding a way of connecting people, helping out each other and being incentivized to do so is a way of creating these social connections that can then help, where they can then help each other out beyond the scope of this particular program and into the future. Another initiative with many partners, but led by Think City, is a climate adaptation initiative that focuses on nature-based solution, but also has a social network and social resilience building component where we work with women and girls and the broader vulnerable communities. Again, it is about learning what people can do around climate change and like building community gardens, for example. But it's also building those social connections that bring people together. So when I summarize, oops, something happened again with the slide. So at the beginning, to me, it was like the pandemic is like climate change on speed? Or in fact, is it the other way around? Is the climate crisis a pandemic in slow motion? There are many parallels between the two. We can learn from the pandemic on how to mobilize people. There are other core benefits between pandemic response and climate action, and we'll hear soon about that in the next presentation. And building social networks, particularly in vulnerable communities, will improve resilience and preparedness for future threats, no matter what they are. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Uta. That was a really fascinating take on what our possible responses could be or should be. I can see there's been a few comments, and we'll have some questions for you a little bit later on. So if you'd just like to stay online with us during the next presentation, and then we're going to open it up to a Q&A session afterwards. Thanks so much, Uta. So our next speaker is Dr. Daniel Mahadzir, and he's the founder and CEO of Genus Nutrigenomics, which is quite a mouthful. He's a passionate climate advocate, particularly on sustainable food and the healthcare system. He's recently been pinned as a climate reality leader by Al Gore, and Daniel is the incoming curator for Global Shapers Kuala Lumpur, an initiative by the World Economic Forum. His works received numerous international recognitions, and the most recent was the Asia Young Nutritionist Award 2019. So Daniel will now be looking at how to maintain the improvements that we've seen in the environment over the last few weeks of lockdown, how we might maintain that in a post-pandemic world. Okay, it seems like we're having a few technical problems. Can I invite Uta to come back online? And maybe I ask some questions of Uta while we try and sort out Daniel's technical problem with his sound. It's one of the joys of everybody under lockdown, that we are all experiencing these technical problems. So Uta, if I can just take this opportunity to ask you some questions while we try and get Daniel's sorted out. So you did talk about one of your slides had this what looked like a neural network when you were talking about obesity. And you're saying how it was through the sort of social networks rather than through family that the sort of occurrence of obesity was sort of spread. And then you also likened that to how we might take action for climate change. So apart from social networking, what other recommendations would you have for us extending action?
Thanks, Duncan. I think there are a couple of points I'd like to make. First is that for the social network, it was above 50%. Family was still close to 50%. So family is still important, but the friends were more important. So in terms of climate change, I feel that there is among those that are convinced that we need to take urgent action, a lot of discussion amongst each other, and we need to get, and sometimes maybe it is even that we sometimes presume we know better than others. And I think to find ourselves in a position to understand where others are coming from, to help them engage as well. So for example, I talked about vulnerable communities. Of course, when you are trying to feed your family today, those are your daily struggles, that is quite difficult to take a longer term view. So maybe if we look at like the slide that I showed about with the action, the hand washing, the holding your elbow over your mouth, If the actions are as simple as that, then maybe if we can break actions down as simple as that, then it might be easier to change social norms than trying to make them bigger actions.
I think something that's been interesting over the last couple of days is that in the US especially, there's been these sort of protests about people demanding that their cities get reopened. That it seems that it's almost a human rights issue. And I think that's very similar to the response that people have had to climate change. Well, it's my right to drive a big SUV and burn as much petrol as I want. I see Daniel is there. Can we hear you, Daniel? No, he's just gone off again. So we'll continue with you, Uta, if you don't mind. Mm-hmm. You talked about some of the projects, the Think City projects on building social resilience. What is that? Why is that a key for what you're proposing? Why is that a key intervention?
It is a key, like when we talk about pandemic or climate change or the like, those that are socially disadvantaged, the ones that are already vulnerable, are even more vulnerable. With climate change or pandemic, where the social action, where the social fabric is sort of challenged, those are the ones that will suffer the most. So we need to look at ways of building their resilience to these type of events. And rather than being very specific in terms of resilience to this or resilience to that, if we find strategies that build the resilience and empowers people to take action by helping each other out and connecting with each other, we are empowering them to address whatever issue comes along. And that is what I find is a key aspect of both of these projects.
Hi, Duncan. Can you hear me now?
We can. Great. Thank you, Daniel.
Cool.
Uta, do stay online, and then we'll talk to you again at the end of the session. So maybe I just do another quick introduction to Daniel. As I mentioned before, he's the founder and CEO of Genus Nutrigenomics. He's a passionate climate advocate, particularly on sustainable food and the healthcare system. And he's recently pinned as a climate reality leader by Al Gore. And he's the incoming curator for Global Shapers Kuala Lumpur, an initiative by the World Economic Forum. So he's now going to be looking at how to maintain the improvement that we've seen in the environment over the past few weeks in a post-pandemic world. Please take it away, Daniel.
Yeah. Thank you, Duncan, for the kind introduction. So hi, everyone. Sorry for the technical glitch. So today I would like to talk about climate and corona. What should we do after the lockdown is over? So Uta just now mentioned about something that is very data-driven. I'm trying to mention about something that can be done individually from an individual level. So I would like to actually get everyone to see this tweet. This is a viral tweet. And then it says, coronavirus is a vaccine and we are the virus. As funny as it sounds, it carries so much truth because we've seen a lot of improvement happening since we started the lockdown. And this improvement is not limited to other countries. It's happening in Malaysia as well. So how do we maintain this improvement? The answer is simple. We must not go back to the status quo. There's no such thing as going back to business as usual. We need to change. So in terms of climate change, these are the three main players. The first one, government needs to come up with an environmentally conscious policy. Business needs to update their business culture, the way they do business, to include climate in their to factor in climate in their practices, and then the people, which is us, the individuals. So coronavirus and the emergency like coronavirus may accelerate action and growth. So this is the best time we take this is the best time for us to actually initiate climate change action, because we already seen the benefits of climate change. So what can we do? So my next presentation is going to be presented in a timeline. So as soon as the lockdown is over, what should we do? So the first one would be physical distancing. This is the new normal, and I repeat, this is the new normal. The term social distancing that has been used before is not a correct term, because we want to maintain our social connections and human interaction. But we just don't want to be too close. And then that's why we need to practice physical distancing, even though the lockdown is over, because the virus is still around. And then you need to be aware of this. And you cannot take the risk. And then, but then I just want to ask everyone, do you feel like trapped, agitated, lonely, and helpless during the lockdown? I'm sure a lot of people will feel that. So that's actually what the animals in the zoo feel. So let the zoo free. So yeah. So going to the next one would be personal hygiene. This is one of the main reasons why we still need to practice physical distancing, because we cannot ensure the level of personal hygiene of the person next to us. So please make sure that you practice the highest level of personal hygiene to avoid becoming a super spreader. Super spreader, it means that you probably carry the virus, it's not affecting you, but it's affecting people around you. So this is not just for coronavirus. Any virus or bacteria will thrive in an unhygienic environment. So the next one is adopt healthy lifestyle. This is something that I always emphasize in all the webinars that I've done throughout the lockdown period. A lot of people, they actually want to stay dormant and then become inactive during the lockdown period. But then we actually forgot that the best soldier during this pandemic is our immunity. And with neglecting our healthy lifestyle actually lowers our immunity, and you can never survive the pandemic without your immunity. So health is multidimensional. If you can see the figure, it starts with food, and then it includes exercise, it includes your mental health as well. But then this figure is actually not complete. So this concept has been mentioned by Uta in her presentation earlier, where we call planetary health. And then this commission in 2015 actually summarized damaging the planet, damage the human health as well. And we can see that there's a lot of death caused by climate change. It is, as Uta termed just now, it's actually a pandemic in a slow motion. It's gonna cause a lot of death as well. It will affect everything: our biodiversity, our nutrition, our water, and our soil. So that's why we've been coming out with this kind of campaign. So reduce, reuse, recycle. Unfortunately, in Malaysia, this campaign is not something that is it's not as effective as we hoped so. So without having this maintained after the lockdown is lifted, it actually gonna make us, it will reverse anything that we've seen now. The air is going to become, hazy again. The water is going to become polluted again. So that's why we need to do something. We need to change. It's going to be a new normal. So I would like to actually give like a list of things that you can do and your neighborhood can do to actually maintain whatever benefits in the environment that we achieve right now. The first one is to become a member of community garden. You need to activate community. And starting a garden is the best way to tell your community that, hey, it's good to actually start taking care of earth. And then, but you need to start by yourself first. You need to first fill up your own lawn or balcony with aromatic fresh herbs. And if you can grow fruits and vegetables, that would be great. But then in urban area, limited space actually gonna make you, it's not very sustainable, right? So that's why you have to come as a community, and then one person plant just one type of fruits, vegetables, or herbs. and then you can actually, come up with a complete garden. So this community garden is just not going to benefit the earth. It is very important for your mental health as well. And then it is very important as it helps to offset the carbon emission. So let's say, imagine if there's another lockdown going to happen. You can just pick the produce from your own garden and then you can use it. Isn't that will increase your resilience and preparedness if something's going to happen again, right? So yeah, that's the first step. The second one is to practice minimalism. So you have to make sure everything that you have fits in a check-in luggage or cabin bag. This is my simple rule. So that it's easier to plan your escape during another lockdown, right? Minimalism doesn't mean that you live without everything. It means that you are making sure that everything that you own, put it to the best of its use. So this actually means waste material as well. For instance, if you have food waste, you have to change it into compost rather than just, throw it in the same bin as other waste. So I would like to take fashion as an example. So do you know that 45% of carbon footprint of any garment is actually produced when we wash it? So we actually produce more, we actually harm the environment by just washing our clothes because we use a lot of chemical-based detergents, we use a lot of water to do that. So that's why you need to buy something simple that doesn't actually require complicated washing techniques. And then with the minimalist lifestyle, you actually will recycle more and be more mindful of the items that being produced so that sustainability is emphasized. So you actually take care of something like organic, fair trade, something that actually, you taking environment as one of the factors in your buying practice. And next one is to change the light in your house or office. This is something that a lot of people don't realize is important. Or just rely on the moonlight because we only use light. Most of us use light during the night, right? So I think after the introduction of GBI, the Green Building Index, most companies and corporations have started to revisit their energy efficiency planning, but we often forget on the light at our home. But we spend most of the time at home during the night and we switch on the light, right? So this is very important to actually mention. By changing the lighting in your home from traditional light bulb to something that is longer lasting and energy saving, something like compact fluorescent lamps, CFL, and a lot of other technology, now we actually reduce our demand on energy resources significantly. And then we also reduce the amount of waste going to landfill significantly because we don't keep changing the light bulb. And then the next one. This is something that is very unconventional. We never take this into account in a lot of environmental talks. But actually planning your day and become more efficient with your errands actually helps the environment as well. So you don't really have to make big investment like buying a hybrid car to reduce your reliance on fossil fuels. But actually by becoming more efficient with your errands, you actually create a system of sustainable living that is based in reducing the amount of natural resources that you consume. So for instance, if you can work from home, then do it. If you can rely on public transportation, then use it. So do you know that one day working from home actually reduces 20% of your emissions from transportation in a week? So, little changes like this count. And if you don't have to go out, you just have to stay home, then just stay home. You don't have to go out. If you can do things remotely, then do it remotely. So more business actually suggesting working from home is the future of work. And when my quick tips is like when you're planning your day, fill up to-do list that actually fits your palm. So anything more than that means you're stretching your day to things. Okay, so the next one would be transportation. So walk, bike, or carpool to work. So this is something that we observed in Wuhan. So during the lockdown in Wuhan, the air quality index improved by 25%. But as soon as the lockdown is lifted, it goes back to normal. So we've seen that during the lockdown, there's no movement, there's no transportation, active transportation going on and everything. And we know transportation is one of the biggest source of negative emission. And this is something that caused the positive change in during the lockdown. So that's why moving forward, we actually need to replan our transportation. If you don't have to go out, if you can just stay at home, do work remotely, then do it. If you can actually carpool to work, then do it. So you're actually preserving the preserving the air quality. So sustainable living not only promotes sustainability by reducing the pollution and the consumption of natural resources, but actually something as simple as walk or bike to work will also improve your health and reduce the strain of public health resources. When you walk, when you bike, you're actually burning calories and you won't develop something like obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and everything. These chronic diseases are the one that makes you visit the hospital until the end of the day. So yeah, it actually benefits you. And then one thing about carpooling that I would like to share with you guys is that it actually provides increased social outlet, and then it improves quality of life. And in one study, it found that a direct connection between your quality of life and sustainability of life that you choose to lead. So it benefits you in the long run because you have someone to talk with when you carpool. And then the next one is sleep early. You need your beauty sleep. So this is something like it's often overlooked, but we actually need to try to get on more natural sleeping schedule because you actually want to get more attuned to the natural light on the day, and then you won't rely so much on the light bulb at night. This actually goes beyond that. Actually, when you have enough amount of sleep, your immunity level is going up, and then your aging process also getting slower. So that's why you need to get a lot, like enough amount of sleep. Not necessarily just benefiting the environment, you also benefit your own health. Okay, so the next one is buy healthy food. Why I put healthy in a bracket? Because naked is always the best. Fresh food is the best. And then usually the freshest food comes with the least amount of packaging. So this is what I always say to my client. This is because they just harvested and they have the most amount of vitamins and minerals in it. And food processing, as we all know, often elongates the shelf time of food at the expense of its nutrients. So you need to start buy products with less packaging, so you know that these products are the most nutritious, and it actually the best from the environment. And then the reason why is because if you want to export something from outside the country, you actually need to package it a lot and then put a lot of preservative to maintain the quality. So if you have a fresh food, that means it actually produced locally, and then you support local business, which brings me to the next point. You have to support local business to reduce your carbon footprint. So exported food usually have a large carbon footprint because of the logistic and the supply chain mechanism. So that's why we often overlook that part because we only see, the transaction level, just take the vegetables and we pay to the seller. But then, during the pandemic, our economy is literally halted. And then in order for us to regenerate the economy, we actually have to start by supporting local businesses. And then this is actually very, very important because the ugly part of capitalism is that big agricultural businesses and farmers they produce a lot of food waste as compared to before pandemic, like as shown in Uta presentation before. This is because rather than selling it cheaper to local seller, they actually want to protect the global food price, but then they cannot export it because our supply chain is halted due to the lockdown. So try to support your own neighborhood market, and then you actually want to keep this small local farmers business alive, so you won't actually produce more waste in the long run. And finally, this actually to consolidate all the steps that I just said to everyone is that you have to improve your preparedness. This picture shows the panic buying that we had when the government announced the lockdown. Are you actually ready for another lockdown? So by actually planning our consumption, our movement choices, our needs, and our connection, we can actually determine the amount of carbon footprint and manage our waste better. And and then you keep on asking yourself that, are you ready for another lockdown or not? Because because this lockdown actually brought up the ugly side of us. When they announced the lockdown, we all went panic buying, hoarding on food, which in turn become expired and been thrown away. Are we actually be ready for it? And then, as I mentioned before, you have to actually keep everything fit into one check-in luggage and then one cabin bag, so you can run away easily if the next virus turns us into zombie, right? So besides everything, I actually have the chance to have a chat with a few people from Africa talking about COVID, and then these quotes actually struck me the most. Viruses don't discriminate or care during pandemic, but they move down the gradients of inequality, which are human-created structures. So, on top of taking care of yourself and being prepared for the next pandemic, check on your family, check on your immediate neighbor, whether they have the same resources and everything. As Uto suggested just now, our social networks, our connections are the one that shape us. So you have to be a community that is very resilient together. So that I guess that's all from me. So back to you, Duncan.
Thanks so much, Daniel. That's really, really interesting. And I like the message right at the end that viruses don't discriminate. I'd like to invite Uta to come back as well, but while she's rejoining us, I just have a couple of questions that came through for you, Daniel, from the floor. So this one was from somebody called Jeremy, and he asks whether the learnings that we've had from the lockdown, such as personal hygiene and social distancing, do you think these are going to be forgotten in a few months' time, or will they stick?
This is something that, it's at risk to be forgotten because it's not embedded in our early education system. And then, in fact, our culture do not inculcate these things. And then, something like using hand sanitizers, you washing hands properly. These are the concepts that just reintroduced during the lockdown. And probably after the lockdown finishes, we tend to not doing it anymore because we don't see the urgency to do it. What Uta and I said just now, humans react to something that is more proximate and urgent. So once the urgency and the proximity is gone, then you tend to forget about all these things. Yeah.
And a second question from Sophia in Penang, and she asks, which individual action do you feel is the most effective? Which personal action is the most effective?
I think the best one would be to actually keep the healthy lifestyle intact. That is the most important part, because in order for you to create any other action, you have to make sure that yourself is healthy first and yourself can function to create another climate action. But like I said, during this pandemic, a lot of people neglect their healthy lifestyle because, they just lock down at home and then they stay dormant. They forgot the immunity part.
And Uta, this question was from Hazira, and she said, do you believe that the pandemic has acted as a social equalizer, or in fact has it exacerbated inequality?
I definitely think it has exacerbated inequalities. But I want to do a little but, and that is that the virus doesn't discriminate between rich and poor. And in fact, I was quite surprised how many prime ministers, ministers, parts of royal family got sick. So in that way, it's indiscriminate. But where it widens the equity divide is in the ability to cope with the consequences of the pandemic. So if you get sick, look, if you live in dense housing, you're more likely to get sick. If you do get sick and you have a higher income, you might have better access to private hospitals. In the first instance, you will probably have better access to information to change your behavior to prevent it. And then longer term, as businesses shut down, when we look at the reserves that people have, some will have no trouble surviving 3-4 months without any income, or they wouldn't lose their income in the first place, while those on casual jobs are the first ones to lose their job, and on top of that, they wouldn't have any savings. So in that respect, while the virus may not discriminate, the actions that follow and the way people can cope with the changes very much widens the equity gap.
So do you think this is a failing of planning, that all around the world, governments seem to have been sort of struggling to find a solution for these people that are on casual work and hourly work and things like that. And as you say, it's these members of society that are the worst hit by the pandemic, even if they don't get it themselves. So is this a failing of planning from governments, or perhaps from society?
I think that there are many factors that contribute to that. And if it was a type of government, then we would see countries that don't have that. And to a certain extent, we do when we look at Scandinavian countries that have better welfare and social support systems, that the equity divide is not as wide, and there is less health inequity outcomes. So yes, it is, and so often this a basic income has been promoted. I think I'm not an expert on it, so it's difficult for me to say. From what I know, it seems to be a good idea, but it's not just that. It is also the environment that we live in. So where do people with less income live? They're probably more likely to live in the floodplains where flooding is more likely. They may be living more densely with less greenery, less nature around them in their neighborhood. So they're more exposed to the urban heat island effect, in addition to being less likely to having air conditioning. So it is a systemic, it's a systems issue. So it's not just the government alone. There are many other aspects to it.
Okay. I think our time is almost up, but I think we have time for one or two questions, which I'll direct to both of you, because they're sort of more broad questions. I have two related questions here. I think they're from Morali and Deep. And will, after the MCO, after the lockdown, will public transport use reduce? because of the pandemic, because of fears that people have. And does that mean that we need to rethink our public transport? Maybe I give this one to you first, Daniel.
Oh yeah. So I think it's definitely going to see a little bit of reduction because of the social distancing concept that we've been trying to populate nowadays. Rethink public transportation, that can be done, but the most important part for me is actually to practice social hygiene, because the cause of cross-infection, anything, is you rather than the transportation itself. Probably public transportation wouldn't see like an immediate bump right after the MCOs, but we can actually start by carpooling and then get to know our neighbors, and then go to work together, something like that. That's my take on it.
Well, it is difficult to say. When I look at buses, they're often not that full, so you could in fact keep your social distancing. On the trains during rush hour, it's a very different story. So again, if I compare my own commute, I can get to work for 4 ringgit on public transport plus my car parking, or I have to spend over 30 ringgit, including car parking tolls and so on. So again, it is a social divide as to who has the ability to move away from public transport if they so wish. So therefore, we need to become quite innovative in how we can modify our public transport system, and maybe it is just the wearing of masks and having a lot more sanitizing stations around, that we can continue to use public transport. And maybe what we can see, maybe one of the benefits is that we should look at land use in our cities and creating more local hubs that reduces the need for long commutes from the suburbs into the city. And having practiced so much working from home, maybe we can just continue some of that as well, to reduce the need on public transport.
Yeah. I'm not going to ask this as a question, but one of the comments in the chat box was that how do we address the fact that we have urban sprawl? And then another comment was that maybe urban sprawl is going to come back into fashion again because people want greater social distancing. So, but we'll see. I think we have time for one last question for both of you. This has come from Cher. And she asks, how do we raise climate change awareness amongst the mainstream, the non-converted, so that social networks can be used to build resilience? Daniel, would you like to take one first?
I think this is a very valid question, because the non-converted mainstream will eventually influence even if not majority of the population, but then a significant amount of population. How do we raise climate change awareness? Is to package it in a message that is sellable to social networks. So these mainstream people, they like something that actually package climate change in a populist messages, something like zero waste movement, I can only think of zero waste movement right now, because this is the most important, this is the most popular thing that's been practicing a lot of mainstream people. So but then if your term mainstream refers to government, for instance, the president of the biggest economy in the world, I think those are the things we need to actually tackle, the insecurities of them. Something like, okay, for instance, if you want people to not getting obesity, then you can actually introduce healthy lifestyle to them, and then rather than saying, oh, you're not gonna get obesity. You just say that, oh, probably if you practice this, you're gonna lose weight. So they will actually make changes in them. Yeah.
In the field of health promotion, we are trying to get people to live healthy, but many people don't see that as a strong enough motivator to do something. If I transfer the lessons from health promotion to climate change, then I would say, don't frame it as climate change. And so there is this theory of change, which talks about sort of pre-contemplator, contemplator. So we have to pick up people where they're at. And so if we want to achieve a specific behavior, we don't say you're doing that to save the climate. But for example, if we look, Daniel, you mentioned packaging. If there was a policy change that packaging is taxed so that less packaging is cheaper, then we change action out of financial, for financial benefit rather than for climate change. And so if through policy and environmental change, like the way we change our built environment around us, I think we can achieve a lot without bringing along a large proportion of the population that may not do it to save the planet, but they may do it to save their wallet.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you to both of you. I can see that we've actually gone over time by a few minutes.
Okay.
And thanks to all of you that have joined us today for this first webinar. And thank you for bearing with us through the technical difficulties we had. But please do look out for our other events. We have another webinar tomorrow, and that's looking at adaptive policy making in the age of crises. And that's with speakers Ng Shin Wei of the Penang Green Council and Dr. Matt Benson from Think City. And that's going to be at the same time tomorrow, 3 p.m. Malaysia time. And you can find the link to get that on Think City's social media. Again, thank you to Dr. Daniel Mahadzir and Dr. Dietrich for making themselves free to be part of this inaugural Earth Day Week webinar. And also thank you for your very thought-provoking presentations and your commentary at the end. I'd like to leave you all now with a short video. This is by the American Museum of Natural History on the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, and look at what has changed and what we all need to do. Thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope that we can see you all here again tomorrow.